Okay guys, we've been solving quadratics. We have one more method that we need to use to solve quadratic equations, and that is the quadratic formula. So it says if ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, so this is kind of our typical trinomial setup. If it equals 0, then you can use this formula actually to figure out what x equals. We've been figuring out x from quadratics. Remember, quadratics have that x squared based on, we've used inverse operations. If there's just an x squared and not an x in it, we just isolated x. We have factored these types of problems to break it down to figure out with the zero product property what's going to make a 0. And this is just a third way. And in that formula, the a value that you see in the formula is just that very front coefficient on the problem. So whatever's in front of x squared. The b that's showing up in this formula in two different places is the middle coefficient, the one that is on the b in the problem. And the third missing piece, the c value in that formula, is the c letter in your setup. So it's the one that doesn't have an x or an x squared on it, okay? And so you might be wondering, that is a really disgusting formula. Why do we even need this? And the reason we need this is because every once in a while you get a quadratic, a trinomial, that will not factor. So it's when a quadratic won't factor. Up to now, when you guys have thought you had one of those problems, we ended up going back and looking through it, and there was a number that you just weren't thinking of. So, you know, you guys always like to say, oh, there's nothing that multiplies to make 4 and adds to make 5, that it won't factor. And then we look at it and we figure out that 4 and 1 will work. Well, there are problems that don't work. So, for example, 3x squared plus 2x minus 4 equals 0. Okay, it sets up, it follows our format here. We have your pieces of a quadratic and it equals 0. Normally, we would say, okay, I can't use inverses because I have an x squared and an x. So I would think about factoring. This is a complicated trinomial, so I would set up my little box over here on the side. And I would say, okay, 3x squared and negative 4. And these two missing pieces would have to add together to make positive 2 and multiply together to make negative 12. Well, with 12, we have the options 1 and 12. That's not going to make a 2. We have 2 and 6. That's not going to make a 2. We've got 3 and 4. That's not going to make a 2. And really, those are the only options we have. So there are no factors of negative 12 that are going to add together to make a positive 2. So this problem won't factor. It truly has no numbers that will make it work. And we already said you can't use inverses because, you remember a couple of sets of notes ago, we said if it has an x squared and an x, then you start trying to add the 4, but you get stuck with these two. So we need another method. And when those two won't work, we use the quadratic formula. So I know I can use it because it follows the pattern. It has the trinomial that equals 0. And the quadratic formula says then that x equals, so the answers for x equal negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. This is not a formula you have to have memorized. It's on your star chart, so don't think you have to memorize it. You're welcome to memorize it if you want to, but you absolutely do not have to. So I'm going to go through this and I'm going to say, okay, a is 3. So everywhere there is an a in the formula, I'm going to replace it with a 3 in parentheses, okay? We put them in parentheses just because that's good algebra process. Otherwise, you might think that that's 43 instead of 4 times 3, and y'all know that 4a means 4 times whatever a is. So I'm going to plug in my 3 where those a's are. Then I'm going to look and I'm going to go, okay, well, the b value in this problem is a 2. So I'm going to go look, and everywhere there is a b, I'm going to plug in a 2 in parentheses. I'm trying to make it nice and dark so it's not quite as confusing with the writing underneath. And the green for my c, which is the -4. The negative is part of that number. And so for this c value, I'm going to plug in, oops, if this pen will work, I'm going to plug in a -4. Again, in parentheses. Now, this has this weird symbol in here, plus minus. All that is telling me is that this problem, we've talked before about how quadratics have 2 different answers, okay? This plus minus is how I'm going to get my 2 different answers. All it means is, okay, my answers are -2 plus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times -4, all divided by 2 times 3. And it also means that same exact problem, -2 minus the square root of 2 squared minus 4 times 3. I should have probably thought this out a little bit better. Times -4. It's squeezed in there, but you get the idea. Okay, and then 2 times 3 on the bottom. So if you notice, these are exactly the same. It's just showing you that this symbol right here, this plus minus, that is actually showing 2 different problems. It's the entire formula addition, and it's the entire formula with subtraction right there. Okay, it makes sense because you start running into, well, it's a square root, so when you square root something, you end up with a positive answer and a negative answer. That's where that's coming from. So now, in my calculator, I'm just going to type in exactly how this looks. I'm going to set up a blank equation, or a blank fraction, by doing Control Divide. So now I have my fraction bar set up, and I'm going to zoom in here so you can kind of actually see what's happening. And then I'm going to plug in -2 plus the square root. The square root button is right on top of the squared button over next to the 4, so you do Control squared. And then 2 squared minus 4 times 3 times -4. I want you to be really careful about the fact that that's a negative in the front. This is a negative here, but you need a minus in the middle. They look almost identical, but the calculator, the way that it is coded, you need to make sure you're using the right button. Then I can use the down arrow for 2 times 3. You could probably work that out and say that it's 6, but some of you will make a mistake on that. So be safe, rely on technology. I'm doing the addition side first, okay? Remember we said this formula actually means 2 different problems. I'm going to do the plus one first, hit enter, and I get this really gross answer. So one of my answers is x equals 0. We usually go 2 numbers after the decimal, and so 0.86, but the next number tells me that I'm going to have to round that up to 0.87. Then to get my second answer, I want this exact same problem except subtraction instead of addition. So if I use the up arrow on my calculator until it's highlighted and then press enter, it will copy that entire problem over. Now I can use my side arrow to go back, delete the plus, change it to a minus, not a negative, a minus. And then when I press enter on that one, I get -1.5. It's going to round up to a 4. -1.54. These answers do not work out clean, okay? That makes sense. This was a problem that didn't work through the 2 easy methods, so it kind of makes sense that it's going to end up with a nasty number, okay? All right, just to show you one more example of this, I'm going to give you the problem 4x squared minus 2x plus 3 equals 3x plus 4. Remember that this must equal 0. At the very, very top of the page, it says you've got to have that trinomial equal to 0. That's a very, very classic situation in quadratics. You want the entire quadratic on one side. Well, we've done this before. I'm just going to subtract that 3x, and I'm going to go ahead and line it up with its like term. And I can go ahead and subtract the 4 too and line it up. That way those cancel out and I end up with equals 0. I'll have 4x squared. Negative 2x and negative 3x makes negative 5x. Positive 3 minus 4 makes negative 1. Now I've got the quadratic equals 0. So I can say, okay, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b, oh gosh, see, I'm already thinking ahead trying to plug in numbers. B squared minus 4ac all over 2a. All right, and I'm just going to go through this quickly. So a is 4. I'm going to plug in a 4 for both of those a values in parentheses. B is negative 5. So you end up with kind of this weird situation in the front where the formula has a negative, but then your B value is also a negative. So when I type this in, I'm going to say negative 5. I'm probably just going to end up calling that a positive 5, okay? The same thing here. B is negative 5. And then C is that negative 1. So C, oh, I used the wrong color. That's going to drive me insane. C is negative 1, and so this C is also negative 1. So in my calculator, I'm going to go ahead and type in negative 5. I know is just 5, but I need my blank thing. So 5 plus the square root of negative 5 squared minus 4 times negative 1, all divided by 2 times 4. Just plugging in what I have written out right over here on the side, and the answer is 1.42, but it's going to round up to 1.43. Then I'm going to copy the entire thing, change it to subtraction, and I end up with 0.18 in the end. So x equals 1.43 when I round correctly, and negative 0.18. Again, that 5, that 5 is making it round up to 18. That 5 is making it round up to 43. Okay? All right. Hope that helps.